Welcome to ScreenQuest, a podcast where a fellowship of film lovers and armchair movie experts plays film roulette. I'm one of your hosts, Chris Waterman, joined by my fellow party members, Will Rotondi.
Hey, how's it going?
May Finch.
Hello, hello.
And special guest, Patrick Glover.
Hi there.
Welcome to the show, Patrick. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm going to introduce you and go through some fun little questions, but why don't you tell us who you are, where you're from, and why you're especially qualified to be on today's episode, which is about Contagion.
I wouldn't say especially qualified, but
way to just tank the podcast right off the bat.
Yeah,
oh my god.
Yes, I'm Patrick. I'm originally from Jacksonville, like the other 2/3 of the hosts, and I am a fourth year. I guess now I'm a fourth year medical student at Emory, which is kind of snugged right up physically to the CDC, and we sort of have a academic incestuous relationship. This was actually let's see here. I think this is the first movie. Well, we're talking about Contagion, and I think this was the first movie I saw in high school. And it was like the first one that I went to of my own accord, where I like convinced my parents to go take me to the theater, meet up with some friends. I think up until then it was all just going with my family to something or renting a movie. So I think this was like my first like big outing with friends in 2011. But I digress. I love this movie, and it has to do with an infectious disease, and those are pretty neat to me, at least.
I will say, before I jump into some of my other getting to know you questions, that before I forget, May on the last episode said that you all decided to bail on watching this over the pandemic. I think that's a great idea. Having now watched the film, this would have given me tremendous anxiety had I watched it over the pandemic, because it's kind of a worst case scenario film. But you guys made the right choice there.
Even a few years removed, it was still very creepy and surreal.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Patrick, I have 3 questions for you to get to know you, and specifically around your history with film. So I want you to tell me your favorite movie ever, the most recent film that you watched, besides this one, of course, and then what you're looking forward to most for upcoming releases. So we'll go one at a time. Favorite film ever?
Ooh, that's a hard one to have like ready. I don't know, like what would be my favorite film across genres. I mean, by the numbers, I think I've probably watched The Big Short the most out of like recent movies. I mean, it's not like a slam dunk masterpiece by all accounts, but it is. It's a fun movie to watch. It's relevant and great casting, great writing. I'd say the funniest movie I've ever seen is between Airplane and The Other Guys. The Other Guys shares a director with The Big Short. It's kind of funny how he pivoted from like mid 2000s, Will Ferrell style comedy to like political drama. Yeah, I probably should have had that answer ready to go, knowing I was going to go on a movie podcast.
It's all good, my friend.
Hey, you did better than I would. I would just forget every single movie I had ever seen in my life if asked that question.
It's like the Billy Eichner, like Man on the Street, like name a woman, and they just
deer in the headlights.
Yeah. So most recent film I watched was actually with May a couple days ago. It was Everything Everywhere All at Once. It still holds up, just a beautiful piece of art. I thought, going into it second time, I kind of knew what to expect, and I would emotionally hold myself together a little better. And May can tell you, I definitely didn't.
We were both sobbing. It's fine.
So, that would also probably be, even though it's so recent, I would say it's probably deserves top 5 in my first answer. Have you guys talked about it on the pod?
We have gushed about it several times.
Okay,
we have not covered it as a film, like, featured in the podcast. Not to say that it couldn't pop up, but But yes, we have gushed about it many times, and I think that's an excellent choice, even though it is like recent, less than a year old, or about a year old.
About.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's excellent. Excellent is excellent. So, and then,
then
final question was, what film are you looking forward to most for upcoming releases?
I've been a little out of the loop. I guess it's not really an upcoming release now that it's in theaters, but John Wick 4, I was very excited about. And I've only heard amazing things. As far as like what's on deck for this year, I feel bad. I couldn't tell you a movie I'm excited about this year.
I think I know one D&D movie.
Oh yeah, I wasn't sure if that was already out yet.
No, not quite yet.
Okay, so yes, that'd be a fun time.
Are you a fan of Denis Villeneuve's work? Looking forward to the second part of Dune, which is supposed to be out, I think, in the fall.
Okay, I didn't know that was already like slated. It had a release date. Okay, yes, then also that. So yeah, I mean, I think it gives me enough time to get around to reading Dune. But yeah, that the first one was just a masterpiece. It was one of the best sci-fi films I've seen in a long time.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your responses. Just always fun way for our audience to get to know a little bit about your history. At Halloween, we get a little more like detail with like, containing it to horror, but I figured we'd open up the door to just film in general for you. So as I said on today's episode, we are going to be discussing Contagion, the 2011? Yeah, 2011 film. Steven Soderbergh, very excited about that. The category was awkward. And based on the description of that category, I think Will did a great job with our first film selection in that category. But first, Patrick, if you don't mind being on the hot seat for just a little bit longer, I'm going to draw you a random side quest. I'll read the prompt for you, and then you can put forth whatever nomination you would like.
Sure. Let's do it.
So I'm shuffling the digital card deck.
We never get to see.
Yeah, you don't. I mean, you if you watch the YouTube version, you certainly do get to see. But yeah, in the moment, I could just be lying to you guys. It's great. I feel like I have so much power.
Yeah, what's to say you don't edit it after the fact, Chris? This could all be manufactured.
The conspiracy theories. I love it. So, Patrick, your side quest is immersive experience, where you can nominate a film, and I think we got a little fast and loose maybe on this one, and even said like TV shows would technically be okay, or maybe like films that also have a TV universe. But pick a movie or TV show where you would yourself like to live in that world and participate in that universe. So, sky's the limit, buddy.
You guys have seen Elysium, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's not obviously a place I'd want to live on either. But I think at the end it's sort of hinted that they do this mass like redistribution of tech and wealth, and they all get the health pods, and it sounds like there's a reorganization of society. Maybe I might roll the dice and see if I don't know if that really counts, because I think we're saying like, would you want to be included in the movie like in that world, or is it you know what I mean? Like it's not really.
You could listen. You can nominate that and have the caveat of like post like shit hitting the fan in the plot of the film, like Elysium.
Mm-hmm.
Like the technology exists, right? And if it does get redistributed, I think that's fine. Like you can be an optimist all you want for sure. When I saw that film for the first time, I thought that was surely going to be a MacGuffin, and he was going to hook up to that thing, and it was going to be like, oh my, no, this doesn't actually like work. Like this is just a fairy tale. But
right. I mean, like the title that came to my head was like Star Trek, but the catch is that I haven't seen the Star Trek movies or the series, so because I was like, well, it's like this post-scarcity kind of utopia for some. That's my understanding, at least. But I don't think I can include that because I haven't actually seen it.
You're
that was the type of answer I was going for.
lovely girlfriend has chosen that as a previous
Oh,
response to this very prompt.
Yeah.
You
So
have
you're
hit the nail on the
cheating.
head.
not at all. But yeah, I was thinking in my head what movies are like kind of like optimistic post-scarcity sci-fi.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I think you have a good pick with Elysium, and it's very you because there's no more illness. You've doctored everything away.
Yeah, we got to get the meta base. Yeah,
Yeah, no,
but
I
yeah.
love that pick. It's been a long time since I've seen Elysium. I remember initially being a little like disappointed after District 9 because that was such a fantastic, like almost like perfect
Mhm.
movie because of the subject matter, especially being so close to the director's like history in South Africa and South Africa's history with apartheid and
Right.
all that. Like, but I think it would probably be worth a second look. Elysium. I never saw what was Chappie. Was that like another one of his?
I never
Mhm.
went to that either.
But I hope he continues to make film. But it's been a while since I've seen it. So in that film, I know there's like the medical pod that can cure anything, right? And the main plot is that Matt Damon contracts cancer from some like work accident or
Yeah.
something, right? And they're like, "Oh, here's a bunch of money. Go get drunk and laid, and then die quickly, please." And he decides like, "No, I don't want to do that." And there's some sort of revolution, right? Am I getting it right? I feel like maybe I'm conflating this with something else in my head too, but
That's it in a nutshell.
yeah, nice. And there's like a villain I know that's played by Charlito Copley, I think is how you say his name, named Kruger. That's the only other thing that sticks out about that movie. He was like some commando badass or something. But yeah,
Yeah, he's like an asset for the like to do the wet work for the like elites on the ship, like down on Earth. He's a really cool character.
yes, dude.
Yeah.
I honestly, that's the part of the movie I remember the most. It's Kruger, just because he going from his little meek bureaucratic type in District 9 to like an actual badass was kind of a cool transformation to
Hmm.
see. But well, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Rotondi, who nominated our film today, Contagion, for Awkward, which is our category where we discuss a movie that is prescient and with enough time and distance from current events, predicted some stuff. Maybe we'll talk, I'm sure, and if we feel like this film did that, spoiler alert, I think it did. But yeah, we'll take it away. Guide us through the discussion.
Sure. Yeah, I would say Contagion is very much an eerie prediction of how the world would react to a global pandemic. I mean, while the virus in Contagion, which is referred to as MEV1 or MEV1, is different from COVID, I mean, there's certainly a lot of similarities, enough that it was like pretty big, I guess, on the internet when it came out, because I remember hearing about how this film was like something I should watch, and I never got around to it. But just similarities like how the virus is transmitted, how countries react to it as it spreads, the propagation of like false information on the internet, and when people start to panic. I mean, all I can really say is I'm glad that I was apparently living under a rock when this movie came out, because I think if I had seen this prior to 2020, I probably would have freaked out and thought we were all mega screwed when COVID hit. Because I mean, I'm not saying that COVID was like a walk in the park in comparison to this film, but like MEV1 is definitely a lot worse in comparison for how quickly it spreads and just how disastrous rather than it is. So if any of our fellow listeners happen to have been living under a rock with me, and you feel free to Google why is Contagion so accurate, you'll be given quite a bit of articles that all came out right around that March 2020 timeframe that wanted to compare and contrast. So, but I guess before we dive into some of those similarities, differences, and all that good stuff, let's go ahead and get some general impressions. And Pat, as our guest, I'm going to have you give you the honor rather of going first. I know you talked a little bit about how you really like the movie, but maybe just give us a little bit more detail about what it was that stuck out to you about the film that you really enjoyed.
Yeah, I mean, like disease causing an apocalypse was kind of a saturated genre in the 2010s, I think, with a lot of other horror sci-fi films. but I guess there wasn't really any suspension of disbelief when it came to Contagion. It was just so realistic, and I remember, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in the episode. Probably the most effective scene for instilling dread is the first few minutes when you follow the fomite around, like with the credit card, and then the POS console, and the glass, and then the traveler, and I don't know, like you just, that tightness in your chest was a mark of, one, amazing directing, and it was the feeling I felt all of like February of 2020, when I just kept like refreshing Worldometer for like case counts of this weird pneumonia in China, and I'm like, wow, there's no brakes on this train. So it rhymed a lot, and I see why people went to go rewatch it. Other like general impressions before we get into it. I mean, I agree. It was like, it wasn't just a film about epidemiology. It was a sociology movie, basically, about alternative truths with throughout the whole thing, skepticism. And the only thing that I want to like caution people about is like, you can go read like recent Letterboxd reviews of this movie, and they're all like, wow, it was like crazy to live through this. I'm like, we got insanely lucky with COVID. All things considered, I mean, I know it disrupted a lot, but all in all, this just a roll of dice could have made this thing a Cormac McCarthy novel. uh, just in terms of just like very basic biochemistry of how a virus like this works. It was, I optimistically hoped it would be a wake up call for like how we handle the next pandemic that is going to come. And maybe I'll talk about this later, but it I don't know, seeing it happen in real life didn't really instill me with a whole lot of hope for what happens next. But anyways, great movie. I also thought it was pretty good at like teaching viewers like real basic 101 stuff about epidemiology, like what a fomite is, what an R naught value is, and I guess just it didn't really take a lot of like artistic license. It was just it was like a dramatic documentary almost about something that hadn't happened yet. So yeah, that's pretty much my take.
I like that. And actually, too, if you don't mind, just kind of giving us a quick review for those who are listening about what a fomite is, what an R naught value is, and why that's relevant to the story.
Yeah, so a lot of the pathogens you encounter in your daily life, the ones you grow up getting every winter, you like to think of them as they're spread by respiratory droplets, like the common cold, the flu, strep throat. But fomites are basically surfaces that act as a source of transmission for a viable pathogen. So there's a lot of, in the life cycle of a pathogen, there's a lot of sort of intermediate steps between going from person to person. They can have zoonotic reservoirs, and I gotta remember the scope of this this episode here, but it's basically, as a fomite is an intermediate physical surface between transmission. And as we remember from, I don't know if you guys were sanitizing your groceries in March of 2020, but I feel like we initially were very cautious with fomite transmission with COVID. We didn't really know that fomites weren't really driving much of the spread. It was more about droplets. But I just remember all the you could almost call it like security theater, where everything was getting sprayed and wiped down all the time, even if it wasn't really doing anything for stopping transmission. But anyways, that's fomites. R naught is a measure of, well, in short, it's a measure of how contagious a virus is when there are when the hosts are immune naive. Basically, they don't have any pre-existing immunity or innate resistance to the pathogen. And also there is no like we call them non-pharmacological interventions being done. So like distancing, masking, isolating, things like that. So it's a fundamental measure of the pathogen just in uncontrolled spread, maybe is a simpler way to say it. And it's not really a linear thing, and I think that's pretty well explained in the movie that when an R naught is above 1, it can now spread uncontrolled. Any way to get the R value, which is no longer R naught again is the fundamental value, but you can affect the R value based on a lot of other things. So you bring the R value below 1, the infection sort of burns itself out. But the R value can change on a lot of principles. And so like the most contagious disease we've ever encountered as a human race was measles, which as an R naught, I think of like 8 to 10. And it is absurdly contagious. And maybe you guys have been around when there are measles outbreaks, but you can catch measles from being in an elevator that someone who was contagious with measles was in like hours ago. Like it's we almost got rid of it in the US, but anyways, that's R naught. And what other terms were really brought up in the movie? I can't remember, but yeah, those are the two big ones that I think were kind of explained by that CDC scientist.
So now I'm going to turn it over to May to get your impressions of having, I guess, completed this film. To go back and rewatch.
This is the first time for me watching it. And as I said earlier, it was spooky. It was eerie. We're only 3 years out, right, from 2020. And it was just so similar in so many ways. I couldn't believe it was something that came out in 2011. And obviously the scientific stuff that like Pat was talking about with how the actual outbreak happens and is spread was very accurate. But everything with like how the CDC's PR got fumbled and how there were these conspiracy theorists was also eerily accurate. So yeah, it was just like uncanny. And again, Will, perfect pick for awkward. Nails the category.
I stole it before one of you all was going to take it. So I knew it was going to end up on
That's
that
why
list.
you were on the spreadsheet so early. Okay.
Yep. I was like, I gotta call it. I gotta get dibs. Excellent. And Chris, how about you? What's your take?
I thought it was fabulous. When I talk about like a film that moves and has momentum, like this movie really like hits the ground running. It has no fat whatsoever on it. Every scene serves a great purpose. The characters, short-lived or like all the way through, like depending on who it is, all really, really memorable, and none of it felt contrived, and that's what I really appreciated. I was expecting a lot more melodrama, which is typically what you see in these sorts of films, and it really just retained a level of humanity that felt real but not overly like done. And I just thought it was spectacular. This will be one that I watch again. Like it got to the end of it, it's like, wow, this is so much better than I thought it is going to be, like given the subject matter. And as I've already said, I agree. I think it's a great pick. It does not give me great hope for the human race, because I feel like it's a good example of how we can be sort of predictable creatures in a lot of ways. And I think given who the filmmaker is, and I'd put him, he tends to do like the occasional crowd pleaser like Ocean's 11, but Steven Soderbergh is also very much in touch with his artistic side as well, and has a pretty good grasp on humanity. And I think he probably saw a lot of stuff through just observing human behavior, and I think it's less him being lucky and probably just having a good grasp on what people are like, and that's kind of scary. As Patrick already said, it does make me feel very fortunate with where things sort of leveled out with COVID. I remember doing calculations like on food, like how much food do we need, like, what's the most effective stuff to have on hand? And like, it never got to that point, and that was really, really lucky, but I do think a lot of, like, well, some of the footage of which behind you is probably maybe seem more hyperbolic in 2011 than it did now. I was like, yeah, I think we were probably closer to that than we would have liked, with a few more unfortunate turn of events, and things could have gotten a lot worse. So glad that he didn't know. But yeah, I love this movie. So great pick. I'm very glad to have watched it, even if it did freak me out.
Yeah, I'm actually glad that you brought up the melodrama too, in the sense of, like, I guess in very typical Hollywood fashion, in most films, whether it's about this subject matter or not, you have like these kind of intense moments, and you sort of expect that something dramatic is going to happen after the fact. Like, there's a scene where Matt Damon's character in the film is taking his daughter to try and get out of the state, and gets to a checkpoint and gets out of his car and wants to argue with the military guy with the assault rifle. And you think, okay, if this was like a typical, I don't know, overly dramatic film, that guy might actually like lift his gun up and like threaten him, and there might be like a shootout or somebody might get hit, but instead it's like a very sort of realistic exchange between the two, where it's just them arguing about it, and the soldier, the National Guard guy, putting him in his place, and he just gets back in his car and goes, and so I appreciated that it wasn't over, like you had mentioned, that it felt real. It felt like these were real people that were all just trying to understand what was going on and try their best not to panic. Although it did happen at some points with some of the main characters, mostly just all the side characters that you see that show up. But yeah, just it felt more huge. It felt more like reality, and I think in some respects that's a good thing for the sake of the film, as a teaching, as a way to teach other people about, this could happen this way. It makes it more realistic in hindsight, having dealt with COVID. And like you mentioned too, Chris, I mean, it's like with a few extra pushes in that direction, and kind of also off of what Pat was saying too, like, it could have been worse. It could have been a whole lot worse. So we just hope that if and when, hopefully not if in our lifetime, but if and when it happens again, that it's something that we have a better handle on. Besides that, well, I guess sort of off of that, then, thinking about some of the similarities between what we've gone through in our current time and what's depicted in the film, I'd kind of like to hear from each one of you about which similarities sort of stood out the most to you as like the most striking, whether it's the first thing that you saw that you were like, oh wow, like this is starting to line up with what we've dealt with, or whether it's just from the film as a whole, something that really stood out in terms of whether it's an aspect of the virus, whether it's a reaction of a character, but just mostly what you thought stood out the most in terms of that. And I'm just going to kind of go back through the list again and start with you, Pat.
Yeah, so favorite parallel was kind of the question. Yeah. I don't know if it was my favorite in the sense that I enjoyed watching it, but I think the parallel of like hoax cures was something that I don't think anybody in 2011 would have seen and called it so accurately, with the stand-in for, I guess, like an Alex Jones type, but and but I don't know, like the hype around it was it called Forsythia, and I guess like ivermectin would have been they really rhymed in terms of like how they were marketed, and it became sort of this litmus thing you would align yourself against or for politically. I guess and I actually have not rewatched the movie in its full length, so I don't remember some of the minor details. You can fill in and bounce off this, but like the idea that like maybe even if we were given basically this miracle vaccine, I guess the epidemiologists didn't realize, what if people just don't want to take it? Like, what if people are no longer really that afraid of the virus? And I think that's a big difference between COVID and this apocalypse virus, MEV1, in Contagion, is that, in Contagion, within a few days, these people are seizing and aspirating and dying right in front of people. And there's this mental it sticks with you. And I think people in general are really bad about estimating risk. I mean, why do people drive without seatbelts um, or smoke or anything like that? It's something you can't quite see in front of you the consequence of, and I don't think we really have the hardware to properly assess risk. So with COVID, around you, the available experiences you have, that heuristic you draw from is that, well, people kind of feel crummy, and then most of the ones I know maybe did fine, and they don't get to see someone drowning in their own lungs on a ventilator. So COVID was kind of in this weird valley where it wasn't acute and severe enough to really scare people into behaving, and but it was severe enough to certainly disrupt a lot of life, and shut down and overwhelm a healthcare system, and effectively cull a lot of vulnerable people. And it was horrible to watch, but you couldn't really convince people viscerally that it was that dangerous. Versus something like Ebola, which has these flare-ups, but it's easy to see who has Ebola. It's a hemorrhagic fever. People bleed out of anything that can bleed. It's easy to avoid people with Ebola, and it's very dramatic. So it people are able to pretty quickly realize it's sort of a self-limiting outbreak usually. And so with Contagion, I guess, with the MEV1, it was like a response that we didn't see, I think, because it was just so dramatic, the deaths and how quickly they happened. And there was a very short incubation period, which is another thing that I think the movie did really well, is describe why incubation periods are so critical to modeling outbreaks. But yeah, so that was kind of I guess that was a parallel and then a contrast. But I think, how long did it take the vaccine to come out in the movie? Was it like months?
I feel like by the time they started working on it, it was probably about 3 months or so in. And then by the time they got it produced, they rushed it so fast. I feel like this movie took place in like half a year, maybe three-quarters of a year. I'd have to go back and confirm that, but that's what it felt like between the dates and just how quickly everything happened. Yeah.
Well, that's another good parallel is and honestly, in like mid 2020, I was very pessimistic about a vaccine. I was like, well, we've got like 10 candidates right now, but the average vaccine from idea to rollout is like 6 to 10 years in most cases, optimistically. But I guess I'd forgotten that when humans kind of focus their efforts, amazing things happen. And I don't think we really ever had an opportunity in our human race to rush a new vaccine to market like this. I mean, even smallpox wasn't really as coordinated. So it was interesting to see the movie also predict that absolutely we can rush a miracle vaccine very quickly when there's a lot of motivation behind it.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about a comment that you mentioned about people not wanting to take it as being something that the film didn't sort of predict. Or I guess there was so there was a little bit, I felt like there was a little bit of that pushback, because Jude Law's character is the sort of the one who does say that, that it's just the pharmaceutical companies want to benefit off of you, and you shouldn't do what they say, and you should take
the Alex Jones.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is totally the Alex Jones, which was insane to me. But there's definitely I was reading through an article where there was I think it was Dr. Paul Offit, and like have a note here about it, where he's a Philadelphia pediatrician whose comment about, and this was back in March 2020 when they were talking about this film, about Contagion and comparing it to COVID. And he talked about how he was like, how often in movies are the vaccines the hero? And I thought, oh man, give it time, Paul. Give it time. Not everybody's going to feel that way, unfortunately. But yeah, but I think you make an excellent point too, about how, the film itself tries to be realistic, because there are several people that talk about like, how long does it take, if we get through clinical trials, how long those trials are going to take, and then we get to mass production of the vaccine, and then how do we decide who's going to get it, and how do we know if somebody has gotten it, and so that sort of, it all felt very similar to me with that too. But like you said, like being able to push something out faster than is normal. It may not be as fast as, say, some other popular virus science fiction movies such as Outbreak, for those of us who may have seen that film with Dustin Hoffman and Morgan Freeman, where they like do a rush job on a vaccine in like 2 days. But there are
Science.
but it is interesting to see where there seems to, it's more realistic, I feel like, in terms of like the projection. It may not, depending on how you feel, and we could get some pushback as we get to a couple other questions on whether we think that is, if that is sort of the Hollywood step back from realism just a little bit or not, but still realistic enough that it felt like it fit very well with our current time. So
yeah. As a fun fact aside, I haven't seen Outbreak, but what you mentioned about the quick turnaround, as soon as the first Institute of Virology in China published publicly the genome of this new coronavirus they were seeing these case clusters in, Moderna was already tinkering with mRNA vaccines. It had been sort of a proof of concept for decades, actually, at this point. And they did actually create the first prototypical mRNA sequence for the vaccine in about a weekend.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
And the trials took, months and months, but it actually was developed in about 48 hours.
Wow.
We had it ready to go. It was neat.
Science.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
Then I take back everything I said about Dustin Hoffman, Morgan Freeman, and trying to fight a virus. Well, with that in mind and my long-winded response, I'm going to turn it over to you, May, to hear what you thought was the most exciting parallel in the film.
Yeah. I mean, I do think Alan Crumweed, the Jude Law character, is very interesting, but even more so than him, this is kind of like the Alex Jones stand-in. I think it's really interesting the contrast that's drawn between him and Dr. Ellis Cheever, who you could compare to like Fauci now, with how their quote unquote scandals with regard to the pandemic response are so disproportionately treated.
Yeah.
Like Dr. Cheever just told his fiance to maybe get out of Chicago a few hours early, which sure, that technically was not something he should have done, but I think almost anyone in his position probably would have done that, right? Whereas you have Alan Crumweed, who basically made a ton off of supplements that don't work and probably led to the deaths of a lot of people, including that one friend that you saw on camera. As well as all the kind of embezzlement with the hedge fund guy and all that. And he's probably going to be fine. He's going to get sued probably, but he got out on bail from his followers. And it's crazy because you kind of see parallels with, say, politicians that made some very convenient stock buys and sells right when the pandemic, started, when they had advanced information, as well as people like Alex Jones, who have been selling, supplements and ivermectin and all that kind of jazz, and have not faced all that much repercussion wise. Whereas I think Fauci got like death threats and stuff. Like, I don't know where his career is standing, but like he's known as the COVID guy, for better or worse, now for the rest of his life. And so, yeah, I think it's just interesting how like different people are held to wildly different standards, and that got modeled pretty well by this movie.
What was the craziest thing that you heard that would actually try and cure COVID?
The darkest one I heard was like drinking Clorox, but that one was just, yeah.
Solid. Pat, how about for yourself? Anything that stood out when you were just like, you guys have got to be kidding me?
Early, before I started med school that summer, in March, I was I had picked up some groceries for some older like family friends, and I like wiped them down and I brought them to their door, and they were applying like Neosporin under their nose. And it wasn't even that insane, but I was just like, you didn't really think that one through. It was just sort of funny, but actually, we had a shortage locally in Atlanta. We had a shortage of povidone, It's an iodine solution we use to prep surgical sites. Because too many sort of, let's say, alternative health enthusiasts were buying it up to either drink or give themselves enemas with, or aspirate with like a neti pot. Iodine solution was being bought up before hospital surgical departments could get it. So that one stands out to me. But I don't think any others. If one comes up, I'll chime in. But the iodine one was pretty funny.
Chris, how about yourself, man? I'm going to turn it back over to you to catch up on not only a parallel to the film, but also any crazy treatments for COVID that you might have come across.
I think the parallel that I kind of enjoyed's the first word that comes to mind, but it certainly didn't enjoy it. But the one that really struck the biggest chord with me was the timeline of things, sort of how like the awareness of the virus rolls out to like the greater public. Very similar, like the rumblings of COVID, and then like, you know, it entered the news cycle a little bit more frequently, and then it felt like there was just like this turning point where, oh, you're going home now from work. We have no idea when you're going back. And we're all in isolation, and there's all this uncertainty and doubt. And I think the film tackled that really, really like well in terms of being accurate and how that, you know, all that feels and how it looks in terms of like public knowledge and awareness and how serious people are taking things, and what it looks like. So yeah, and then you have like terms like social distancing and shit that like came up in the movie that probably seems like, oh, maybe this is a legit term, but I mean, it's a term that, and I think anybody that lived through COVID will never forget and understand exactly what that means, right? And why isolation is important. So yeah, just the timeline in general, I thought like even all the way up through the vaccine, to kind of bring it back to that, and all seemed very familiar. As far as like remedies go, I don't know, like I think you guys have covered most of the crazy ones. Ivermectin like was kind of like meme worthy, but also sad, like in a way as well. Like, you know, it was hard not to chuckle at some of the ridiculousness of that, but also I'm sure a lot of people probably got sick and died as a result of thinking that it was the safer option versus the vaccine. Yeah, I don't know how I have a lot more to offer on that. Unfortunately, I think we covered most of the bases there.
I was reading across a list of items, kind of like a top 10 list of crazy remedies for COVID. And one of them,
They'll make a listicle about anything these days.
I know, yeah. It was something to the effect of, if you inhaled the hot air from one of those blow dryers, I guess like a hair dryer. It was either a hair dryer or it's like a hand dryer, one of the two, maybe both, that would somehow help. And I just thought, wow, just the image of somebody trying to just inhale hot air, thinking that somehow that's
cheeks blowing out from the air pressure.
Somehow that's going to take care of it. Yep. Just give your whole face a sauna, and that'll, you know.
Exposure therapy to all of the germs.
I mean, look, I'm not saying that doing that wouldn't feel good. I can't confirm or deny that, but I don't think that will solve your problem. So yeah, I think for me, I think sort of the hesitancy in some parts of the film where they weren't really sure where to talk about where the virus originated, and you know, not really knowing for sure where it came from, but having kind of an idea, I felt was very realistic and very similar to what we've had to go through. I mean, there's been talk about where COVID may have come from or may not have come from, and so I think between that and then when it continued to change, you know, thinking about how we've had so many variants now, that was probably a part in the film where I was just like, oh, here we go, all right. It's time for the next round, let's see what's going to happen, you know. And so that's probably what stood out to me the most. But thinking about, and this actually ties into the next question that I've got for you guys, is thinking about the very end where we actually do see in sort of a flashback, for the sake for the viewers to be able to know where things all tied together and started. Um, that we're given a glimpse of what the cause was, at least based on what the film wants to tell us, which is that we're the viewers, we're given a closure when we see that a bulldozer is in a forest in China. It destroys a bat habitat. Those bats then migrate, find some bananas, and end up taking shelter in this pig farm where they're eating. And one bat happens to drop a little piece of banana that it's eating, which is then eaten by a pig. And that pig's then sold at market and is then prepared in a casino, which is where Gwyneth Paltrow's character, which I know we haven't really talked about any of the specific characters beyond maybe Matt Damon and Lawrence Fishburne's character, but Gwyneth Paltrow, who is shown to be sort of the beginning of the spread of the virus, from being infected by shaking hands with the chef who's preparing that pig, who kind of stops mid preparation, doesn't wash his hands, and then goes out and shakes hands with Gwyneth Paltrow. And so that's sort of where we see the virus begin from. So I bring this all up to ask whether you feel like having this sense of closure, how you feel like that affects the film overall. Does it help having that? And as sort of a follow-up question, if you're comfortable answering, because I know that sometimes in the news, especially with COVID, this can be kind of a contentious point that people talk about the origin of COVID. Would having this kind of closure with COVID make any difference to you as well? And so, Pat, I'll go ahead and pass that over to you.
So you're saying would knowing, like, with, perfect ground truth that this like zoonotic transmission of COVID from, like, if we knew exactly how it started, would that change anything today? Well, one, I just want to say that the sequence at the very end was one of the more accurate depictions of antigenic shift that you see when you suddenly get a new pandemic strain of flu, for example. It is exactly how it happens. Basically, one zoonotic host, like a pig, gets infected with two separate strains of, say, influenza A. And they sort of trade notes accidentally while infecting the same cell in the pig. And all of a sudden, you get this massive. Most of those note trading is basically a dead end, where it's just not a viable virus particle anymore. But sometimes it suddenly has a totally new assortment of antigens on its surface that make it incredibly dangerous to a new host. We saw that a few times in history with flu, but the movie itself is based off of what's called Nipah virus. It's a very similar in real life to the one in the movie. It's actually from pigs, and it was from a co-infection in bats that happened in the 90s. We've fortunately never seen sustained human-to-human transmission of it, but there are occasional outbreaks in, I believe, Malaysia and India, and Bangladesh. But I guess to answer the question, though, to bring it back, would knowing it change any? Well, my takeaway from a lot of it is just that, like I said, with that horribly unlucky event with this co-infection of two strains of a virus, the same virus. I mean, it's an indictment of industrial agriculture and factory farming, because unfortunately, when you have I don't know the exact numbers on like chickens that we have in factory farms, but you're basically rolling those dice billions, if not trillions, of times a day. Sometimes you're going to get a very unlucky roll, and it would kind of confirm what we already sort of suspected, and that's just that when like the setup we have of raising livestock doesn't really do us any favors when it comes to cooking up new fun pathogens that are really good at infecting mammals suddenly. And we're seeing that kind of right now in slow motion with H5N1. It's a pre-existing strain of avian flu that really, really messes up human lungs. But over the past few years, we've seen it steadily get better at finding new mammals to infect. I don't know where COVID came from. It's kind of hard to to really figure out now at this point. There's only so much surveillance data you can actually do on like livestock and whatnot, but I don't really have a concise answer. I guess just it doesn't really change the setup. Is that we have stacked the deck to eventually come up with new animal-borne pathogens that spread really easily in humans, and that regardless of whether it was a gain of function lab leak or whatever, it's just they're going to happen. And I don't know if our ability to respond to the next one is any different, whether it came from human experimentation or accident. It's all the same. I don't know if we're really ready for it. I don't know what kind of answer we were expecting, but yeah.
I thought there's two very interesting things about the ending. One is, like Patrick was talking about, with showing it's a combination of the large scale farming and the environmental encroachments that leads to this disaster, right? And how that wasn't necessarily what was being talked about for the whole movie. Like, they were trying to find patient zero, but there was not much of any conversation about the environmental and industrial factors that would have led to a crossover like this. So it was like kind of weird for that to be just like a visual afterthought with no doubt dialogue or really discussion going on about it. But it also felt kind of accurate to how we've been talking about COVID. Like, politically, it matters a lot what country it came from. Everyone cares about that, but less so about what environmental conditions led to that, which I think is probably more important, because you see ecological encroachment happening in every country, and that's often what leads to things like this. The other interesting thing is that the bulldozing was happening as a result. Like, the bulldozers had the logo of Beth's company, Gwyneth Paltrow's character, which was I thought a very poetic little touch there. And I don't know, it just brought kind of a cosmic irony to the whole thing, but it also, I guess, made it less believable, because oftentimes, like, the executives and people in charge of these large companies that are creating conditions for pandemics to occur will never see any kind of consequences. Whereas she was the first consequence, really. And yeah, as far as COVID, sorry, I was just gonna say, as far as COVID goes, like, I don't care too much in terms of, like, you know, lab leak versus market debate. What I'm worried about is, like, more animal crossover happening, and we should be talking more about how we take steps with our agriculture and industrial practices to prevent that.
I like that the ending was poetic, and I think it was, it's offered up almost like food for thought, right? Of nobody is talking about these things. Like, hey, audience, like, what do you think about that, right? Like, that, like, the driving cause of this is really, like, the human factor. Like, yeah, it might come from animals, but, like, we're the root cause of why the events take place that lead to the creation of the virus. And yeah, the ironic factor was awesome. I'll give Marianne credit. She's the first one to notice the logo. She was like, that's her company. See, like, that was her company. She played herself, kind of thing. And yeah, that's probably one of the more, like, cinematic touches in a film that is pretty grounded, but I didn't mind it. As far as where COVID came from, I don't really give a shit. Like, I think it's way more important to figure out, as others have already said, how to mitigate, like, something like that from happening, and then just doing better that the next time around. Seems like it's inevitable. Like, the lessons that we take from this pandemic and what went well and what didn't, I think, if people could learn from that and have some self-reflection, and I think that's I'm content with that. Personally, I don't think I would get any closure whatsoever from, like, yeah, this bat dropped a piece of banana, and, like, oh, cool, that's how it happened. Like, well, that makes me feel better. Like, no, it doesn't matter to me whatsoever.
Are there any other items, thoughts about the film that you guys want to make sure that we cover before we wrap up and get to a game? And that can include Any potential additions to the weird COVID remedies, or just in general, anything that you really liked about the film that you want to make sure we talk about?
It's like that there was no plot. Sorry, Pat. Go ahead.
No, go right ahead.
I just like that nobody had plot armor. I thought that was really refreshing. That like, yep, it's a pandemic, a very serious one at that. People get sick and die, and doesn't matter who the top billed stars are. I thought that was great because it had a little bit of a suspense factor, but also I wasn't going, well, like Kate Winslet, like she's safe. Like she's gonna be the hero of the whole thing because it's Kate Winslet. Really like that factor. So that's just odd. I thought it was brave in terms of, it helps to have a big ensemble cast, I guess, to be able to do that as well. Because you couldn't kill all of your main actors. Let's be real. Like somebody's gonna carry the film, but it still I thought it was a fairly brave storytelling choice.
Yeah, seriously, it's not Game of Thrones over here. Come on. Yeah. Pat, you were saying?
Oh, I was just I loved that of all people to cast as a CDC lab tech, it was Dimitri Martin. It immediately took me out of it when I saw it. I was like, what is this movie trying to be? Yeah, exactly. So that was just sort of a silly little thing I couldn't get over. Other takeaways. I think Soderbergh said in an interview when I was just sort of Googling around before this podcast, Soderbergh said he wanted to do sort of a spiritual successor to Contagion. I don't know if he's made plans or really greenlit a film about it, but I would like to see him revisit this idea in a movie. One thing I'm interested in, maybe more just in the real world, is our level of like pandemic fatigue. And I saw this happening with like monkeypox. When those cases were also climbing in sort of an uncontrolled, exponential way, we didn't really know where the brakes were on this train. I remember seeing, I won't name names, but people who were very suspicious. They were like, oh, we're going into the midterms. The Dems aren't doing so hot in the polls. They're going to bring out this thing and try to scare us back into, being sheeple or whatever. And I'm wondering, like, well, let's say H5N1 suddenly, we have definitive evidence it can spread from human to human, and anybody who knows anything about epidemiology says, oh, like head for the hills, we need to get on top of this thing quickly because it's got a case fatality rate of 30 to 50%. I'm just imagining like a big chunk of the population being like, oh, here we go again, and not taking it seriously, and then we have an extinction level event. And I just thought that'd be a poetic way to go. Maybe Soderbergh will write that into a movie, but yeah, it's just something I was left thinking about, is if we did have the big one, would people even take it seriously in enough time for it to make a difference?
I was just going to say, what was Dr. Cheever saying about the disease of misinformation again?
Yeah, being worse than the actual virus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, perfect. I was thinking too, something that you mentioned too earlier, Pat, about Ebola, where it's something that you can see the threat, you can see what it's doing, versus COVID, where it's all internal or primarily internal. And so, yeah, I think that if we were to be something worse, if it was more visceral, would we react differently, or would we, like you mentioned, just be tired of the virus fatigue, just dealing with feeling like it was being automatically politicized versus actually just trying to listen to science and do what is considered to be the healthiest, safest route. So I'm 100% behind you on that, man. And that would be fascinating to see a film on, and I would definitely watch that, and probably then get scared shitless about the next thing that comes up in the news. But
I have one unrelated thought on the movie, and that is going back to Chris's thing about plot armor. It's funny that the one character we know is safe, which is Matt Damon's character. As soon as we know he's safe, he just goes like full American Dad and just like has this great subplot of like intimidating his daughter's boyfriend with a gun and arranging a prom for her. It was
Yep.
like funny and hokey, but kind of sweet. I don't know how you guys felt about that.
He was pretty gentle. I mean, you know, go home, man. Like I was like, at least he's not pointing the gun at the poor child. Like,
That's
you
true.
know, like he's obviously concerned, but you know, I was expecting there to again, like I don't know why, like it was far enough in the film to be some melodrama where it's like, shh, get away from my daughter there, whatever his name was. Like, and I was just glad they didn't go that right. It's just very, you know, non-ceremonially, like tears him off, like go home. That's it.
I like when when his daughter's about to open the door to let that kid in, and he's just like, no, don't keep the door shut. Just go home. No, it's fine. No, we can't hang out right now. Don't worry
Raw
about
flowers.
it.
Yeah, cram them up your ass. Get out of here. Like,
no, actually, no, it's not okay. Please don't. You know, don't touch anything. Yeah.
The
Or
whole
like the quit
thanks, but
touching your
no,
face.
get away.
Yeah.
they did chalk up a point. I did think it was kind of sweet and like very realistic of as things started to come back to normal, he's given time to finally grieve, like and process all the stuff with the wife's infidelity and like the loss of, you know, wife and a child. Essentially, and it's a stepkid, but like that moment crying in the closet, that was really like nice in a sad way of just like he's able to kind of process things normally, you know, like for the first time in a while. He's not like on defense mode and survival mode.
I mean, I don't know if this is part of our closeout games, but has there been a good piece of COVID pandemic art yet? Has the movie come out or the great work that signifies that time? There have been movies about or took place during the pandemic, but has someone actually released it yet? I think the closest someone has come to capturing a lot of that feeling is Bo Burnham's Inside. I don't know if it's the definitive work of the pandemic for what it felt like to be an average person stuck inside, but it's probably the one that resonated so far with me the most. I don't know how you guys feel.
That's awesome. I have not seen, but I will have to check out. How about you, May? Any thoughts to add on that?
I mostly agree with Patrick, but I would add that I actually think the Knives Out sequel, Glass Onion, is a fantastic like pandemic film that's not really about the pandemic, but says a lot more when you see it against the backdrop of the pandemic. It's kind of like it's established that it's at that time at the start of the movie. And then everyone, you know, this isn't really a spoiler, but everyone is going someplace and inoculated against the virus, and it becomes a non-issue from that point on. But it just is a great commentary on like the isolationist, kind of like elitist attitudes of people who were well off and were not affected at all really by like the social isolation and economic like catastrophe that happened.
I'm not going to call this definitive, but something I enjoyed that was of the era was there's a really great bottle episode of Mythic Quest where they filmed it all in Zoom. So, and it was like a special that they put out. So you've got like the whole cast of Mythic Quests working, you know, remotely, and it felt very authentic in that way. And it was also kind of offered up as a source of comfort to people in the real world of like, here's something kind of fun as a distraction. And I think it has one of the sweetest endings like ever to an episode of Mythic Quest, which is filled with kind of bittersweet moments. And I really, really enjoyed that a lot with some time and distance removed, especially to kind of see it in a retrospective light versus like in the moment was kind of cool.
Speaking of Zoom, how could I forget the Princess Bride reshoot done entirely at home?
You know what? I think that may have taken it for me. Yes. For those listeners that are not aware, you should definitely Google the remake of The Princess Bride done entirely with a compilation of actors all shooting on their iPhones. I'm assuming they're iPhones on their mobile devices, pretty much shot for shot, or at least their interpretation of it. Line for line maybe is better to
there we
say.
go.
with some Lego figures and other, stand-in props to help connect the scenes of the entirety of The Princess Bride, which I'm pretty sure ends with the actual director and his father at the end. I could be wrong about that, but I
Rob
feel like
Reiner,
that was
Carl
correct.
Reiner, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the last things that Reiner Sr. did before he passed away. So, I think he passed away. I want to say that. I could just be making up fake news right now for the sake of this podcast, but hopefully I'm correct.
Wait, you hope Carl Reiner's dead? That's not nice.
I know that is sort of a double-edged sword when I put it that way, right? Like, man, I hope my facts are accurate, but also R.I.P.
He did in fact die June 29th of 2020. So you're correct, sir.
Well, you killed him.
Yeah,
yeah.
R.I.P.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, I think you guys covered it. I think those are great suggestions in terms of like a COVID period piece. The only other thing I can think of that probably that I would vote for in a tangential way is The Last of Us, because I think zombie movies are the closest we'll have to like understanding how people will panic about things that are not as in control that they think they're in control of and they can't. Like I used to look at zombie movies and think this is so ridiculous and over the top, and why is there always like that one idiot that lets the one zombie into the base where everybody's camped out at? And then COVID happened and I'm like, you know what, zombie movies were not harsh enough. Like it's completely plausible now. I entirely believe that this could happen now and that people would react this way. So I mean, that put zombie movies in a new light for me too. And I love the Last of Us video game and the show itself on its own merits without even thinking about it in relation to COVID. But I'd have to throw that in there too. So.
I'm about halfway through the second one. In fact, I think I know I'm halfway through the second one for those who have played the second one with the big plot switch. But I'm
nice.
loving it so far. It's probably the best story-based video game I played that I can remember, actually. I'm really going to give it the superlative there.
Glad you're vibing with it. People loved it or hated it. There was no two speeds on that one.
I'm going to put them both together as one work as a video game. I do love the second. I don't fall into the camp of hating it because it's trendy to hate the second one. But anyways, yeah, huge fan of the gameplay.
Yeah, so Chris, all I'm saying is when you get the group back together for your video game discussion, Pat needs to, meet up and talk about
that.
Yeah, if
Nice.
ECG ever gets back together, we'll put an addendum in there. Bobby Miller on that podcast famously said that The Last of Us was a 6 out of 10. Part 2, so not part 1, part 2, and just felt like it was. And it's funny, like it's interesting, like where people have nitpicks, but some of his nitpicks were quite funny. But we razz him all the time. He also voted Sonic 2 over Ocarina of Time for greatest video games ever. So I digress. That tells you his taste.
That's a bold claim.
It's a good calibration there. Okay.
Love you, Bobby, if you're listening. Yeah, so Will, you've prepared a round of Pitch Storm. I'm going to bow out of the competition because I think we should do the battle of the significant others here with May versus Pat.
I like where your thoughts at, Chris, and I'm going to do you one better. I'm going to let you judge it, and I'm going to read the options. How about that? We're going to switch it up a little bit. We're gonna make it 2 teams here, or 2 judges, sort of.
I think this is just Chris wimping out.
I think I have a pretty good record historically with Pitch Storm. No, I just I think it'd just be fun. What I'm hoping for is that we can start a fight that'll continue after the podcast wraps up. No, I'm kidding.
Excellent.
Will, would you be able to recap the rules for Pat since he hasn't played before?
Absolutely. And I'd be happy to do that for our fellow listeners too. If whether or not this is your first time listening to the podcast or you've heard us talk about this game before, I don't think we've ever really gone into the particulars until we actually play the game. Besides give credit where credit is due, which is that it is a game designed by Ben Kepner, and he was kind enough to let us use it on this podcast. Essentially, the rules are, Pat, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the option that you can either choose a plot, or a type of character. And then to do that, I'll give you 3 options, and you can choose one of those for either a plot or a character. If you choose a plot, then the character is whatever I pull. Or if you choose a character, then the plot's whatever I pull. And you have a minute to use that information to create the most amazing film that you can think of. In that time, probably about 30 seconds through, I guess for the sake of this, I'll be the one who'll pause it, but I'll interrupt you. Not to be too rude about it, but I'll interrupt you and tell you that you'll have to throw in like one extra little piece of something to make it that much better. So then you'll have the additional time to try and figure out how you're going to weave that into the storyline. So sounds a little convoluted, but I guarantee you, once you just let your mind roll, man, it's going to be great. So I have every confidence in you with this. So.
All right. I'm excited.
I would also be willing to go first as an example, if that would be helpful.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Take it away.
Cool. All right, May. So tell me, would you prefer a character or a plot?
I always go character first.
That's true. Okay. So your options are, I think this is relevant in a tangential way as well. A group of scientists on the brink of resurrecting dinosaurs, or 2 kids lost in the woods, or the first human colonists on Mars.
I'm going to go with human colonists on Mars.
All right. So your plot is the first human colonists on Mars fight to save a rare and mysterious animal from poachers.
Okay. Opening establishing shot, we see Earth rise from Mars. Camera pans back, we see a lovely little burgeoning colony on Mars. You see a little bit of terraforming, you see some oxygen pods, you see a very happy and pleased looking Matt Damon chatting up Angelina Jolie in fantastic fashionable spacesuits. Suddenly, there's a horrendous scream, and you see.
I'm gonna stop you right there. This might tie in well to what you were thinking, but hear me out. Can you make the love interest a super creepy monster? Because those play really well in October.
You hear a horrendous scream, and you see this sort of like stone tiger dragon creature just burst out of a crater. And it comes hurtling at Angelina Jolie, bites her on the arm. Suddenly, she's turning into this crazy dragon tiger creature. They start fighting. Matt Damon is torn between, protecting this endangered animal and getting it off of the turned Angelina Jolie. He has to go through this really deep spiritual journey about it, and ends up dying for his love.
Oh, all right. I like it. But Chris will be the ultimate judge, so I'm just the messenger. All right. With that in mind, Pat, are you ready?
I am ready, and let's switch it up, and I will pick a plot. And
excellent. All right. So your options include for plot either discover a map leading to a legendary treasure hoard, or did I hear Ellie like that one?
Ellie.
She likes treasure hoards, I can tell.
Audience pick.
Yeah. Steals a magical treasure. Man, there's another treasure? Woo, that was good. Steals a magical treasure from a dangerous witch. So you have a legendary treasure hoard. If you think these 2 are too close together, I will give you another one. But magical treasure from a dangerous witch, a map leading to a legendary treasure hoard, or getting in big trouble with the mafia.
I'm going to go with getting in big trouble with the mafia.
All right. So your character shall be a blind woman living by herself gets in big trouble with the mafia.
Okay. So this blind woman, we have, so in my head, this is going to be like a seedy, like Pulp Fiction time jump type of movie. So this blind woman was actually one of the first generation of colonists on Mars. And we didn't foresee that increased cosmic radiation would actually damage your retinas. So she's congenitally blind. Somehow, through being misled, she's in debt with the mafia. They're running this big like ivory trade on Mars, and there's a lot of poachers trying to find endangered animals.
I'm gonna
But
stop you right there,
she's
Pat.
okay.
What if we tell this story? I like what you got, but what if we tell the story backwards? Because we want to win this at Sundance.
Okay, so backwards. Okay. I hadn't actually thought about how the movie would end. Let's see here. So she's walking away from an explosion, a pile of ivory tusks that were booby trapped to take out all the mob bosses. She's in a spacesuit. There's some 90s rock song playing as she rides off into the sun. Well, I guess we're playing backwards. So how much time do I have?
You've got a thought to finish.
A thought to finish. That would be the last scene. I don't know how we would arrive there, but it'd be a very corny, almost like self-aware ending to a movie about settling debts with or getting revenge on the mob.
I'm getting some Armageddon meets Memento vibes. I like it. It. All right.
I'm getting some Nolan. Don't know how we arrived there, but that will be the final shot.
Right. If you're confused, you just didn't get it. If you're confused by the timeline.
Super decadent too, just blowing up ivory tusk.
Yeah. It's about sending a message. It's not about money.
I like it.
Is this a unpermitted spin-off of my original series, Pat?
Oh, deliberately. It's we'll see you in court. It's IP theft for sure. Yeah.
Hey, one could be like a limited television run. The other one, like straight to streaming. The other one can be a full feature film.
This is just Trolls 2 on Mars.
Nice.
It's the Martian like organized crime cinematic universe.
Nice.
Yeah.
Is their motto that you can't piss on hospitality? Because I feel like that's got to come up at some point.
I'll work it in. Yeah.
Nice.
You have to piss in your
Awesome.
spacesuit. Yeah.
Ooh, it's all reclaimed in the thigh pouch.
Yeah.
If Dune told me anything.
The still suits. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Awesome, you guys. All right, Chris, you are the judge. Tell us what the verdict is.
So I'm gonna talk through this here. So starting with May, I like that May took the curveball and then made the curveball a curveball, because when you're like, oh, the love interest has to be a monster, I thought like, oh, the monster that shows up is going to be who Angelina falls in love with. Nah, man. Angelina turns into the monster. And now we got a little Beauty and the Beast thing going on. I think that's beautiful. It's great. Tragic death at the end as well, just to really like seal it, in. Really, really
Our
cool.
goal is to make audiences cry.
Now my boy Pat over here, like he went hard mode. He was like, I'm gonna take May's plot and the plot that I was given and tie those together. I thought that was really, really cool. Also, I think he's got like a weird psychic thing going on, because he predicted the time jump thing like right before Will was like, you got to do it backwards. So clearly he's vibing with some psychic energy there. Of course, any movie that ends in an explosion, pretty hard to argue with. Both movies I would absolutely watch. I'm gonna give May the out on this one with the curveball and the curveball by a slight hair, by a fraction of a point. I'm gonna give it to May. I like the plot twist of like the love interest is not the monster that shows up, but the monster that Angelina becomes. That was great. So
well played.
Well played, both of you.
Nice.
That was hard to pick.
Yeah.
Genuinely hard to pick.
Good games.
Good games all around.
Definitely.
I'll see you in court for that.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's gonna be a real like dating myself now, but like Armageddon versus Deep Impact, or Dante's Peak versus Volcano. Remember, like,
yes,
the studios would just try to race to see who could get the first disaster movie out. And it was the same exact thing.
The summer of Happy Feet, March of the Penguins, and Surf's Up. Yeah,
exactly.
Nice.
was a weird time.
It was.
All
All right. Well, let's find out what we are watching next. Now, of course, if we draw a Will pick, this will be his third and final in a row. And on the fly here, I might institute a new rule unless May has objections, because Will and I will have both potentially gone 3 in a row. I might say that like May has to go because poor May has not had a nominee in a while. That's just the way pure chance works. But
You're
how do we
making
feel
it
about that?
mandatory.
Mandatory, yeah. We feel good with that.
I'm okay either way.
It's about time I did some homework.
Hopefully it's not an issue, but here we go. Our pick is another new category, trope soup, and the film is a Will pick, and it is The Quick and the Dead
Noise.
movie I saw about a year ago, and I'm eager to rewatch now that I have it under my belt. For those of you who don't know, it is a Sam Raimi directed Western starring Sharon Stone, Gene Hackman, and a very young Leonardo DiCaprio. It's about a gunfighting tournament to the death with a ultimate grand prize. So there's your little tease. And Sam Raimi is the same director who made Evil Dead and Drag Me to Hell and a lot of other genre movies like Spider-Man, Spider-Man 2 and 3, actually, I think, of the Tobey Maguire era. But Will, tell us why you nominated this for Trope Soup, which, to remind the viewers, is a trope-filled film that is not necessarily bad. Basically, that's how we've described the category. Tropes don't have to be bad, so talk about a film that's filled with tropes that you love.
I feel like Sam Raimi is one of those directors where he can take sort of the aspects of certain genres and just have fun with them. Like you were talking about Evil Dead, or if we watched oh geez, now I feel bad because this was another pick that I had of his earlier with Cate Blanchett, The Gift, which was like the Southern Gothic horror genre. And I just think that he takes these ideas and he just plays around and has a good time. And you can tell that it's very sort of cartoonish in the style that it's filmed in, but that's okay. Like if you know going into it that's what it's going to be, then I think it's a lot of fun. I think if you go into it and you don't know what it's going to be, yeah, it might be hit or miss, no pun intended. But
that was Marianne. Marianne did not know what she signed up for and did not like this film very much at all. And then it was sort of post viewing, I was like, oh, so this is who this guy is and other stuff. And she's like, oh, okay, like maybe had I like known going into it, she thought it was going to be like something akin to like Unforgiven or like a more serious kind of like Western. I love it. It was like it's fucking Mortal Kombat, like with like gunfighters. Come on, it's great.
It's true. Yeah. So a lot of the like the very stereotypical Western sort of themes, or plot devices, and even like at the very end, like I almost got a little bit of vertigo with the way the camera wants to like just tilt in all these like zoom out motions. So yeah, it's very over the top, but I think it's got a great cast and I think it's a lot of fun to go with. So that's why I chose it.
It sounds fun. I've never heard of it before, but I'm game.
Nice. Also a younger Russell Crowe shows up, but man, yeah, DiCaprio, when you see him, he's like a baby. So
yeah, I had some concerns with some interactions that he had with
like
one of the co-stars. I was like,
he's had one age that he's gone for his entire life, sir.
yeah, that's true. That's true. He is consistent.
He's consistent, if nothing else.
I heard someone this is only a tangentially related point, but I heard someone joke that it's not that he like gets tired of women when they hit 25. It's just that's when the prefrontal cortex finishes developing of the women, and they're like, why am I with Leonardo DiCaprio?
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Excellent. Well, guys, thanks again for being willing to join me on this adventure of Contagion. Pat, thank you so much for your feedback. It's been a pleasure having you, man. And your insight into this was, like I was saying before, it's very succinct and very educational, and I think added a lot to our discussion. So thank you for being willing to join us on that, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a fun topic to talk about. I mean, it gets really depressing really quickly, but hopefully we didn't shake off too many fans. But yeah, wash your hands and let's have me back on if you ever want to have your medical correspondent weigh in on movies. I love talking about Gattaca for that reason.
Ooh,
yeah.
all right, duly. I'm gonna make a note of that.
I'll have May keep me posted if there's anything that would be worthwhile.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Welcome back anytime.
Awesome. This is fun.
That about wraps it up. I do want to note one last order of business, which is happy birthday to the podcast. By the time this is released, we will be celebrating 1 year of content. So happy birthday to Screen Quest. It's been an honor and a privilege to do this with you all almost weekly. You know, we have our little breaks and hiatuses here and there, but it's something I really do genuinely look forward to, and I feel like it's made my life more enriched. So thank both of you for, you know, going on this journey and showing up each week and giving it your all. It's been awesome.
Oh, there's no way it's been a year. Wow.
The feeling
We're recording
is
this on the
mutual.
28th. In 2 days, it will be the 1 year anniversary of our first episode, which was Contact. Yep.
Oh.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you all for watching and listening. As promised, I have posted the submission form under our episode descriptions, both on the podcast feed for our audio listeners and then on YouTube. If you have your own film suggestions, please fill out that form. You can choose the option to be a host if you want to be a host. Otherwise, you can simply put a quick comment on why you selected the film, and we will eventually work in some of those suggestions to our pile so that we have some user-submitted suggestions as a possible draw when we select our film each week. But until next time, we love you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.